When we whisper the words medieval punishment, what images flood the mind? We see the grim silhouette of the gallows against a stormy sky. We imagine the cold, damp stone of a dungeon, the rusted chains, the ominous shadow of the executioner's axe. Our imagination, fed by centuries of lurid fiction and folklore, gravitates towards the spectacular and the sadistic. The Iron Maiden, the breaking wheel, the rack stretching sinew and bone to their breaking point. These are instruments of physical annihilation, tools designed to inflict the maximum amount of pain upon a human body. They are loud, bloody, and unambiguous in their purpose. They are the history of torture we think we know. But what if I told you that for the vast majority of people in medieval history, the most common and perhaps most effective forms of punishment were far quieter, far less bloody, and in their own way infinitely more insidious? What if the most powerful tool of control wasn't designed to break a person's body, but to shatter their soul? What if the most feared prison had no walls, and the most painful sentence was one you served in the full light of day, surrounded by your friends, your family, your entire world? This is a story about that kind of punishment. It's about a weapon forged not from iron, but from wood and shame. A sentence carried out not by a masked torturer in a hidden chamber, but by the collective gaze of your own community. It is a story about a curious, almost comical-looking object, a punishment that at first glance seems more like a prank than a legal sentence. A punishment that involved forcing a person to wear a heavy, awkward, repurposed barrel. This is the story of the drunkard's cloak. And it is the story of the devastating power of public humiliation. To understand why forcing a man to stumble around town wearing a barrel could be considered a serious form of legal retribution, we must first strip away our modern sensibilities. We must forget our world of sprawling, anonymous cities, of digital avatars and fleeting interactions with strangers. We must transport ourselves back to the world of the medieval European town or village. And the first thing we must understand about this world is that it was small. Imagine living in a community of a few hundred, perhaps a few thousand people. You are born there, you will likely work there, marry there, and die there. There is no moving to a new city to start over. There is no hiding in the crowd, because there is no crowd of strangers. There is only the intricate, inescapable web of community. The blacksmith who shoes your horse is the father of the boy your daughter might marry. The woman you buy your bread from is the same woman you sit next to in church every Sunday. The priest who hears your confession knows your family history back 3 generations. Your neighbors know what time you wake up. They know the sound of your arguments with your spouse. They know when you've had a good harvest. And they certainly know when you've had one too many Alash at the tavern. In this world, there was no separation between your public and private self. Your identity was not something you cultivated internally. It was something that was granted to you and constantly maintained by the community around you. And the currency of this world, the single most valuable asset a person could possess, was their reputation, their honor, their good name. Honor, for us, is often an abstract concept, a personal sense of integrity. For a person in the Middle Ages, honor was concrete. It was your credit score, your social security, your passport to participating in society. A man with a good name could get a loan from a neighbor. His word was trusted in a dispute. He could serve on the town council. His children could make good marriages. A woman with a good reputation was considered a valuable partner, a pillar of her household, a keeper of communal morality. To lose that reputation, to have your name sullied, was not just embarrassing. It was a form of social death. It meant being ostracized, distrusted, isolated. It meant being cast out from the warm circle of the community and left to shiver in the cold. This fear of social death, of being shamed and excluded, was the fundamental mechanism of social control. The community, in order to survive the precariousness of medieval life famine, plague, war depended on an incredibly high degree of conformity and cooperation. Everyone had a role to play, and social harmony was paramount. A disruptive individual was not just a nuisance. They were a threat to the entire organism. And one of the most common and visible disruptors of this delicate social harmony was the public drunk. Drunkenness was not seen as a private medical issue or a personal failing. It was a public sin and a social crime. The drunkard was loud. He brawled. He neglected his duties to his family and his trade. He wasted precious money. He set a terrible example for the young. In the eyes of the church, he was committing the sin of gluttony and opening his soul to the devil. In the eyes of the town council, he was a source of disorder, a crack in the carefully constructed wall of social order. So what was to be done with such a man? You could fine him, but he might just drink the money away. You could put him in the stocks for a few hours, and that was certainly common. But for repeat offenders, or for communities that favored a more mobile and theatrical form of punishment, something more was needed. Something that didn't just punish the act, but branded the offender with the identity of his crime. Enter the drunkard's cloak. The object itself was brutally simple, a testament to rustic ingenuity. It was also known by many other names, which tells us how widespread the concept was. In England, particularly in the area of Newcastle upon Tyne, it was famous as the Newcastle barrel. In Germany, it was the Schandmantel or Schantenith, mantle of shame, or cask of shame. In parts of Holland, a similar device existed. The construction was straightforward. Take a standard wooden beer or wine barrel. Remove the top and bottom. Cut a hole in what was now the top surface, just large enough for a man's head to pass through. Then cut 2 smaller holes in the sides for his arms. The offender, having been sentenced by the local magistrate or town council, would be forced to wear this contraption. The heavy wooden barrel would be lowered over his head, resting on his shoulders. His head and arms would stick out, but the rest of his body would be completely encased in wood. It was heavy. It was awkward. It forced him to walk with a strange, waddling gait. It smelled of stale beer and his own sweat. He was, in essence, transformed into a walking symbol of his own vice. He didn't just commit the sin of drunkenness. He became drunkenness, a man literally clothed in the vessel of his own downfall. And then began the second and most crucial part of the punishment, the procession. The walk of shame. The offender would be forced to parade through the most public parts of the town. Down the high street, through the bustling market square, past the church doors as people were gathering for service. He was not just being punished, he was being exhibited. He was a piece of living street theater, a moral lesson for all to see. Let us try to imagine this experience from the inside, from within the barrel. The first thing you would feel is the physical reality of it. The weight on your shoulders, a dull, grinding ache that would grow with every step. The rough wood chafing your neck and under your arms. The feeling of being trapped, your movements restricted, your balance precarious. You are clumsy, vulnerable, and utterly ridiculous. But the physical discomfort, as real as it was, paled in comparison to the psychological torment. This was the true engine of the punishment. The world, your entire world, has been reduced to a series of watching eyes and pointing fingers. The sound is a symphony of humiliation. You hear the jeers of men you once shared a drink with at the tavern. You hear the high-pitched, merciless laughter of children, who see only a funny man in a barrel and feel no compunction about shouting insults. You hear the sharp, judgmental whispers of the town's matriarchs, the women you've known your whole life, their faces a mixture of pity and disgust. And perhaps worst of all, you see the faces of those who are silent. The face of your wife, averting her eyes in shame. The face of your own children, confused and mortified. The face of the blacksmith you owe money to, his expression hard and unforgiving. The face of the priest, filled with sorrowful condemnation. Every glance is a blow. Every turn back is a rejection. You are utterly alone, yet you are the center of everyone's attention. It is the paradox of public shaming, maximum visibility combined with absolute social isolation. This punishment worked because it weaponized the human brain's most fundamental social instincts. The desire for belonging, the need for approval, the deep primal fear of ostracism. It was a form of social psychology applied with brutal effectiveness. The goal was not simply to cause temporary embarrassment. The goal was to inflict a deep and lasting wound on the offender's psyche, to burn the memory of this experience into his soul so that he would do anything to avoid repeating it. The goal was to force an internal recalibration. The community was essentially saying, "This is what we think of you when you behave this way. This foolish, pathetic, shameful creature is who you become. Do you see it now? Do you feel it now?" The desired outcome was that the offender would internalize the community's judgment. His own self-perception would be shattered and then rebuilt in alignment with the community's values. The shame was not just an external force. It was meant to become an internal one. When he finally took off the barrel, bruised and humiliated, the hope was that the cloak of shame would remain on him invisibly, a constant reminder of his transgression and the community's power to enforce its norms. And from the perspective of the community, the drunkard's cloak served another vital purpose beyond punishing the individual. It was a powerful act of communal reaffirmation. By collectively participating in the shaming of the drunkard, whether by jeering, whispering, or simply watching in silent judgment, the community was drawing a thick, bold line in the sand. On one side was the offender, the deviant, the one who had broken the rules. On the other side was us, the good, orderly, sober citizens. The punishment, therefore, wasn't just about him. It was about them. It was a ritual that strengthened social bonds, reinforced shared values, and reminded everyone of the consequences of stepping out of line. It was social control made visible, a lesson taught not with a textbook, but with a human being as the teaching aid. While the name drunkard's cloak points to its primary use, the device was versatile. In some German states, a version of the barrel, sometimes called a shanton, was used for tradesmen who cheated their customers, a baker who sold underweight loaves, for instance. In these cases, the object of their crime might be hung from the barrel, like a short loaf of bread or a faulty scale, to make the nature of their transgression perfectly clear. Could also be used for brawlers, chronic gossips, or those who violated the Sabbath. Any crime that disrupted the public peace and was deemed not serious enough for corporal punishment, but too serious to be ignored, could land you in the barrel. The drunkard's cloak was not an isolated phenomenon. It was part of a whole family of shaming punishments, or what German legal historians call Ehrenstrafen, honor punishments. These punishments were all based on the same principle, that the loss of honor and the experience of public disgrace were penalties as real and as painful as any physical blow. To fully understand the world of the drunkard's cloak, we must look at its sinister cousins. Perhaps the most infamous of these is the scold's bridle or the brank. This was a horrifying device, an iron muzzle or cage that was locked onto a person's head. It featured a metal plate or bridle bit, often studded with a spike, that was forced into the mouth and pressed down on the tongue. This made it impossible for the wearer to speak. The scold's bridle was used almost exclusively on women, particularly those accused of being a common scold, a woman who gossiped, nagged, brawled, or otherwise spoke out of turn and challenged male authority. Like the drunkard's cloak, the punishment involved being paraded through the town, led by a chain held by a town official. The symbolism was as brutal as the device itself. It was the physical manifestation of the phrase, "hold your tongue." It was a tool designed to silence and humiliate women who were deemed too outspoken, reducing them to the status of a muzzled animal. While the drunkard's cloak attacked a man for his lack of self-control, the scold's bridle attacked a woman for her use of her voice. Both punishments powerfully reveal the anxieties and power structures of the time. Then we have the stocks and the pillory, perhaps the most recognizable of all shaming punishments. While often lumped together, they were distinct. The stocks typically secured the ankles, sometimes the wrists as well, forcing the offender into a seated, uncomfortable position. The pillory, from the Latin pila for pillar, was a wooden frame on a post, with holes for the head and hands. This was arguably the more severe punishment. It forced the offender to stand, often for hours, with their head and hands trapped, their face fully exposed to the crowd. The pillory was a license for public abuse. The trapped and defenseless offender was a tempting target. The crowd would pelt them with whatever was at hand: mud, rotten fruit and vegetables, animal dung, offal. The jeers and insults were constant. A sentence in the pillory was not just a sentence of shame. It was a sentence of physical torment at the hands of the mob. It was the community's rage given a sanctioned outlet. Some offenders were even killed in the pillory, struck by a well-aimed rock or suffocated by the filth thrown at them. And we cannot forget the cucking stool, which later evolved into the ducking stool. Initially, the cucking stool was simply a chair, often a toilet chair, on which an offender was seated and exhibited outside their own door or in the town square. It was used for a variety of offenses, from brewing bad ale to being a scold. Later, it morphed into the more infamous ducking stool, a chair attached to a long wooden arm, like a seesaw, on the bank of a river or pond. The offender, again almost always a woman, would be strapped into the chair and then repeatedly ducked or submerged in the cold, dirty water. This combined the terror and discomfort of near drowning with the spectacle of public humiliation. It was a punishment that blurred the line between shaming and direct physical assault. All of these punishments, from the drunkard's cloak to the ducking stool, operated on the same fundamental principles of social psychology. They relied on visibility, on the power of the collective gaze. They functioned by stripping away a person's dignity and temporarily casting them out of the human community. And they all offered, at least in theory, a path back. The punishment was temporary. Once you had served your time in the barrel or the stocks, once you had endured the jeers and the filth, you were, in principle, allowed back into the fold. You had paid your debt to the community's sense of order. The ritual of shaming was followed by a ritual of quiet reintegration. Whether your neighbors ever truly forgot or ever truly trusted you again was another matter entirely. So what happened to these punishments? Why do we no longer see a man in a barrel being paraded through Times Square or Piccadilly Circus? The decline of public shaming punishments was a slow, gradual process driven by profound changes in Western society. The first and most important factor was the rise of the city and the dawn of urbanization. The entire system of public shaming was predicated on the small, close-knit community where everyone knew everyone else. As towns grew into cities, and cities swelled into metropolises, anonymity began to take hold. Shaming a man in a crowd of 10,000 strangers who would never see him again simply didn't have the same bite. The public was no longer a community of peers, but an indifferent, anonymous mess. The social bonds that gave the punishment its power had dissolved. The second major factor was the rise of a new institution, the prison. During the 18th and 19th centuries, there was a major philosophical shift in the nature of punishment. Influenced by the ideas of the Enlightenment, reformers argued for punishment to be more rational, more standardized, and less spectacular. The messy, emotional, theatrical cruelty of public shaming was seen as a relic of a barbaric past. The prison offered a different model, a place of confinement, reflection, and forced labor, hidden away from public view. Punishment moved from the town square to behind high, windowless walls. The goal was no longer to shame the offender in public, but to remove them from the public altogether. Finally, there was a gradual change in sensibilities. The idea of human dignity began to take root. The spectacle of public cruelty, which once served to reinforce social order, came to be seen as degrading not only to the person being punished, but to the society that inflicted it. It was no longer considered a healthy expression of communal justice, but a form of mob rule, a base and uncivilized display. And so, the drunkard's cloak, the stocks, and the scold's bridle were retired. They were put away in museums, curiosities from a darker age, evidence of how far we've supposedly come. But have we really moved beyond them? Is the age of public shaming truly over? I would argue that it is not. It has simply changed its form. It has migrated from the town square to the global village of the internet. Think about it. The fundamental mechanisms are identical. An individual commits a transgression, not necessarily a legal crime, but a violation of a social norm. It could be an offensive joke, an unpopular opinion, a moment of poor judgment caught on camera. This transgression is then made visible to a massive public. The digital pillory is a viral video. The jeering crowd is a Twitter mob or a Reddit thread. The punishment is a torrent of public condemnation, insults, and threats. The goal of this modern shaming ritual is the same as it was in medieval history: to isolate the offender, to damage their reputation, and to enforce the norms of a particular group. People lose their jobs, their friends, their peace of mind. Their name becomes inextricably linked with their transgression, searchable on Google for all time. The cloak of shame is now a permanent digital footprint. There are, of course, crucial differences. The medieval crowd was finite. The internet mob is potentially global and limitless. The medieval punishment was temporary and offered a clear path back to the community. Online shaming can be permanent, a digital ghost that haunts a person forever. And most importantly, the medieval punishment was administered by a recognized local authority, magistrate, a town council, who administers justice online. The mob itself, there is no judge, no jury, no due process. It is the raw, unfiltered power of collective outrage. So when we look back at the drunkard's cloak, we should see more than just a strange historical artifact. We should see a reflection of a timeless human impulse, the desire to regulate our communities and enforce our values through the powerful and dangerous weapon of shame. The technology has changed, the scale has exploded, but the fundamental principles of social psychology and social control remain eerily the same. The barrel is gone, but the human need to point, to judge, and to cast out is as strong as ever. What are your thoughts on this? Does the logic of the drunkard's cloak make a certain kind of sense in the context of its time? And what do you make of its modern parallels? Is online public shaming a necessary tool for social justice and accountability in a world where traditional institutions sometimes fail? Or is it a regression to the very kind of mob rule that the modern justice system was designed to prevent? This is a complex question with no easy answers, and it cuts to the heart of what it means to live in a community, whether that community is a medieval village or a global network. Let me know your perspective in the comments below. I'm always fascinated by how these historical patterns reappear in our own time. If you found this exploration into the psychology of punishment and the power of shame compelling, I hope you'll subscribe and enable notifications. We have many more journeys to take into the dark and often misunderstood corners of history, where the true stories are often far stranger and more thought-provoking than the myths. Thank you for listening.